Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me today. Welcome to Get in Tune with Michael Grassia. I'm Michael Grassia. Now, normally I do a quick little talk here. I'm not going to do that. I got a special guest. I want to get right to it. So let me just play the intro, and we'll get started. All right, welcome back. Thank you. Again, I'm Michael Grassia. This is Get in Tune. I have a very special guest today. He is an author, an educator, an animation historian. It's Jerry Beck. So I'm going to bring him in right now. And here we go. Hello, Jerry.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you for joining us.
Here.
We got a lot of stuff. We already got a few people watching. I want to let the people at home watching, please, add comments, talk to us, ask Jerry any questions you're interested in. I am happy to put them up on screen for him to look at and answer. But Jerry, for those who are unfamiliar with you and your work, can you please let us know a little bit about you?
Well, I'm a person who was a comic book geek when I was a little kid. I loved cartoons and comics. And back in those days, this is a million years ago, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have YouTube. We didn't have cable television. We didn't have streaming. We didn't even have DVDs, VHS tapes. We didn't have any of that stuff. Yeah. None of that stuff. All we had was television and movies, and that's about it. But I loved cartoons, the animated cartoons, and I wanted to know more about them. And there were no books. We had books. Books existed, but we had no books about the history of animation. And so I just started doing research on my own. I'd literally watch the cartoons off of television and write the titles down and who directed it and things like. I kind of wanted to know. There was nowhere to go for this information. So I ended up doing that, and I'm making my ridiculously long story short. And maybe a decade or so later, I ended up working with a partner, and we did a book called Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies. And it's a book. It's a book, meaning it's still a reference book that a lot of people use today. It's basically a list of all of the old Warner Brothers cartoons. And that started me on a career that's gotten me involved with anime and, all the rest of the history of animation, Disney and, Tom and Jerry and all of that. And I've done everything since. I've been involved with making cartoons. I've been involved with distributing cartoons, which means bringing it into the movie theaters or television. I've been an executive at different studios. I've gotten involved with curating cartoons onto DVDs and things like that. Here's one of the Blu-rays that I was involved with, where we put together, and I write the little booklet in there. I do like audio commentary. I pick the cartoons, and done like 15 other books on Nicktoons and Hanna-Barbera cartoons, animated features, all sorts of subjects. And now I'm teaching. I'm really, really proud in my later years that I'm now teaching the history of animation to animation students in Los Angeles. I'm in California. So and I have a blog. I have several blogs. Cartoon research is my hobby, my pride and joy. I get no money out of it. It's just a hobby. It's just every day, me and a bunch of like-minded friends, we post articles about various things from the history of animation. It could be about a crummy TV cartoon from 30 years ago, or it could be about brand new research on, silent animation. Tomorrow I'm posting some new movie book reviews because so many animation books come out all the time. And now that we're all kind of inside now, we need things to do and watch and read. So although I recommend that if you haven't read my blog, we've been doing it the format that it's in. It's literally about 20 years old now. Wow. That blog, except we started doing the format that I do now with the 5 days a week with a new little article. We started that in I think in 2013. So even so, that's still 7 years of literally hundreds. I have to go into the back end and find out how many posts I have on that site, but we must have hundreds and hundreds, probably way over 1,000 of articles. They're all, look, some people might not care for it, others incredibly fascinating, and so there's a lot of good stuff there for people, and I'm just glad we're able to put it out there, because the history of animation. I will say this about the history of animation. I worked on a book. I don't know if I can pull it out fast enough. I'll see if I can, just for an audio visual.
Yeah.
I don't have everything standing here locally like I thought, but I did a book. This is my worn, beat up copy of Mice and Magic by Leonard Maltin. And this was really the thing that got me into books. Here's my name over here. I'm the research associate on this book. This book came out in 1980. Oh my God, 40 years ago. That shows you how old I am. Came out 40 years ago, and it was the first book about the whole history of animation. And we thought, when we did this book 40 years ago, we thought we put everything in here. We thought, now there's a lot of good stuff in there, and it's still very useful to me today. But we thought we figured out everything. And as soon as the book came out, from the rest of my life on, has been every day a new discovery, something new. It's you know, they say it's like a giant jigsaw puzzle. And every day is another piece gets found, and a little piece of the puzzle. We're recreating this whole what happened between the 1900s, actually, the 1910s, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. It wasn't until the late 70s that we started to put this animation history together. Yeah. And so that's what I've been doing.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say that is a great book if you can find it. I don't know if it's still in print, is it? Or
it's still in print.
Yeah, because I read that mid to late 90s in college. Yeah. I think that was and I still have my copy, but like I said, I have books in storage and I don't know 100% where they are at the moment. Otherwise I would have pulled out some of my books that you were part of and showed off my collection. I think you know, going back to just talking about the history of animation, which is kind of what I want to do here. Do you I just out of curiosity, do you remember the first cartoon you saw that like said, I want to learn?
I mean, nobody remembers the first card. I'll tell you 3 quick cartoon things. I'll get to that answer. That's the way I answer questions.
No, it's okay.
But I do remember. I don't think it was my first cartoon. I remember watching cartoons. Oh my God. I mean, I remember when like Rocky and Bullwinkle first on. I mean, I was like 4, I was like 4 years old, and the Flintstones went on when I was 5. So now you can date how old I am, but that's a long, long time ago. And I was 5. So when you're 5, at least for me, I had to go to bed, at like 7 o'clock or 7:30 in the evening. That was when my parents made us kids go to bed, and it was dark out finally, maybe in the winter. And I remember going to bed, and then I remember waking up. I never forgot this one memory. I remember waking up in what I thought was the middle of the night, and I couldn't go back to sleep. And I got out of my bed, and I went on a hunt for my mom and dad. Didn't know where they were because the whole house was pitch black. And thank goodness they weren't doing anything naughty. I saw their bedroom door. I opened it up, and they were watching TV. And I crawled into the classic little kid thing. I crawled into bed to watch TV with them, which I'd never done before. And they were watching the Flintstones, which I had not seen before, because it was on at 8:30 in the evening. It was 8 o'clock, 8:30 at night, prime time. And it stuck with me then. It stuck with me forever, which was, there's cartoons for kids for me when I'm, at home in the afternoon, and there's cartoons for grownups at night. And it sort of made me realize that animation wasn't just for kids. It was for everybody. And that's one thing I learned in researching the history of animation, that animation was never aimed at kids. Kids love it. There's many animations today made for kids on, Nick Jr. or Nicktoons or whatever. There's preschool shows and things like that. But animation it was originally a novelty film. It was a trick film. And it was exhibited to theaters with the whole audience watching it. It was adults and children, and not unlike The Simpsons today, that's aimed at both adults and children. That's the way all animation sort of was back, including Tom and Jerry and Bugs Bunny and all of that. I do want to conclude with one other cartoon anecdote. I do remember that there was one day in my teens. See, I got into this I was always watching cartoons as a kid, but I was more into comic books. And the somewhere in my teen years, when I was high school, maybe early high school, come home from school, do my homework, turn on the TV, and there'd be Bugs Bunny. And slowly, while Bugs Bunny was on in the background and I was doing other stuff, I began to pick up on the jokes and the humor. And it suddenly occurred to me as a teenager, because I had regaled, or that's not the right word, but I regarded animation myself as a kid's thing, as something I grew out of. But then I started to notice that these jokes were actually funny, and I was laughing at them. And I'm realizing, oh, wow, and in the animation, I started to notice how sophisticated it was. Being into Marvel Comics, I was looking at the great artwork that was there, and I wanted to be that kind of an artist. And I started kind of to observe that the artwork in Bugs Bunny cartoons was really good. And then I wondered, how do they make the characters move? And I couldn't figure. So all of this was going on when I was like 14, 15, 16. And I do remember at one point, that was that little moment where I realized, well, what's the name of this cartoon? Oh, a cartoon came on the Bugs Bunny Saturday morning show, and it had a particular gag. I without going into it, and I was like, oh, I love that cartoon with that gag. I love that. What's the name of that cartoon? Oh, well, the title just went by, so there's no way. Where can I look this up? Nowhere. There was nowhere to look it up. There were no books. We didn't have the internet.
Mm-hmm.
So I just got weird about it. Next week I'm going to write down the title of the cartoon and what happens in that cartoon. And then I'm going to do that every week on the Bugs Bunny show, so I can get some kind of a list. And eventually I knew they would rerun, because I had seen a rerun. That cartoon was a rerun to me. So it was like everything was reruns. So I figured, oh, it's going to come around again. Someday that cartoon I like is going to come around, and I'll know the title, And then once I had the title, and that did happen, and once I had the title, I wanted to know who made it, because I noticed the difference in style. And this is what happened. I just slowly self-educated myself to the old classic cartoons. I wanted to know more about them. Now, one more thing. How did I end up doing this the rest of my life? I wanted to be an animator. I wanted to be an artist. And when I got out of high school, I went to school in New York, School of Visual Arts. I wanted to be an animator. I wanted to be to take it more seriously. That was a school where people did that. I mean, if you were 15, 16, 17, 18 and still into even comic books and cartoons back in the Stone Age, people looked at you strange. That was a weird thing. It's not like today. Everybody's into it. Today, Comic-Con gets 100,000 people or whatever. Back then, I went to the earliest Comic-Cons, and they were, 300 people was gigantic back then, and that was a big deal. And it was really cool because it was kind of underground, and yet there was a whole community of people who really cared about this stuff. So I went to when I went to school to learn it. I did learn it. I got to meet some friends of mine who still are friends of mine today. People like Tom Cito, who's a great animator. He co-directed Osmosis Jones. He worked on Beauty and the Beast and Shrek and great Disney films and things. And my friend, a name you might know, Eric Goldberg, who's one of the top drawing animator at Disney today.
I love his work.
He did the genie in Aladdin, the original Aladdin, and he's done many, many other things. And he was, again, a student in the school. We were all people who loved animation. They were good back in those days. Back in those days, they really had their talent was like right there in front of you. I was kind of funky. I didn't think I wasn't up to their level. And at that time, you couldn't even get a job. Even at their level, certainly not at my level. It was because all the old timers were still around. Everyone who had made the cartoons back in the golden age were still, now they're in their 50s and 60s, but they were still there making the Fruit Loop commercials and things. They were still there practicing their craft. And so getting in a young person, you had to be amazingly good. I will say Eric was probably one of those people and was able to get into some jobs then. It was really hard for new people to get in. And this was like, well, I'll date it now. It was like the 70s, mid 70s. And I was like, and I was studying myself, about the history of animation. Again, there was no course on such a thing. So I was like, I'm less interested in being involved and being an animator now. I didn't think it was good enough anyway, but I'm more interested in the history of it and maybe there's something there. And that's that led me to Leonard Maltin, who was basically an unknown writer at that time, but he had written a book about shorts, and he was like-minded, meaning he was somebody who felt the same way. And we ended up becoming friends, and Leonard got a deal to do a book about cartoons in the same way that he did a book about short subjects. And then I became his assistant on that book. And through the work on that, which was several years, it was like, I want to say it was between, it was at least 76, 77. I know that in 79 was when the book was finished, and it didn't come out till the spring of 1980. So, and I know we were working on it a couple of years before that. So it was just a real long process to do that, because there was no references. There were no other books. There were no other places to go. We had to call up Chuck Jones. We had to call up the famous classic animators of the old days. They were still with us. Many of them were still with us. Some of them were dying, but it was great to be able to do that and to learn about that. And then, like I said, we thought that was it. We can now move on with the rest of our lives and do other things. And I got into the film industry because I love movies and I love animation, and that's another story. But I got involved in the film distribution part of the film industry, and but between more and more people writing to me with more information, meeting more people, just having done that book, I became like a magnet for people who are interested in this, and more people, contacting me about it. And meanwhile, I was professionally getting involved with film distribution, modern day films in the 1980s, and which led, again, I don't want to go too far off a field here, but that led me to, by the late 80s, to start a company to start distributing Japanese anime to theaters, and then VHS, which have now existed, and that was a whole story. It's a whole story. But I was involved with that film Akira, if you've heard of that.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, and I was involved with many others, including My Neighbor Totoro, and
great film.
On and on and on. I mean, other titles of various types. So, and that was just one part of my crazy life. I then went on to work for Nickelodeon and Disney and have my own companies and do all sorts of things. So a life came out of all of this. A career came out of it, and I'm really happy right now. Doing my blogs, I still write articles. I'm teaching at the various schools. Right now, I'm spending a lot of time doing what we're doing right now, setting up remote teaching. And so that's the story of my life right there. That's it. That's the whole story. Right?
Yeah, no, that's great. I love how you got into it. I'm not going to really share stories about me because I want this to be about you, but it was I grew up wanting to be an animator, and I used to record all cartoons on VHS.
Right.
And I'd play them back, and I'd freeze a frame, and I'd draw off the screen. And that's kind of how I taught myself to draw. Cool. But to learn to animate, I used to play them back in slow motion to see if I can figure out how the animators were making things move. Because I was too young to get to read the books at the time. Right. And it wasn't until, I don't know, I think I was like maybe 12 or 13. My parents got me the cartoon animation by Preston Blair. And that was it for me, and I wanted to animate. But that's my story. I'm not really going to go into more stuff. But that was like kind of the same thing. I just wanted to explore. I wanted to figure this stuff out. Instead of writing down the names, I just played back everything and tried to watch it. But we got a question from one of our audience members. His name is James Richardson. He's here. His question is, what are some of the new animation trends in animation that you see getting people excited, interested in the medium?
All right, new trends in animation. Let's see what I can answer on that. Well, first of all, I mean, I'm kind of doing this through the eyes of my students. Clearly, people are more interested in anime. You have to understand, I come from an era when nobody cared. Yeah, I did, because I was interested in this, but nobody cared about it a long time ago. But now I see the students, they love it. They've really picked up on all the stories and the emotions and that kind of thing. The other trend that I see is stop motion. Like Robot Chicken and Coraline and the movies that Leica Studios makes, and Aardman with play animation. But stop motion is you'd think, and we did think when CG came in, 20 years ago. When CG came in, that we thought that's the end of stop motion because that really kind of takes the place of it. Dimensional looking, but it didn't. It's almost there's more stop motion going on in the last 10 years than there's ever been in almost in the history. I mean, there was always stop motion, but it was Willis O'Brien and George Powell and Gumby, and really I can just pick the isolated spots throughout, Ray Harryhausen with the stop motion,
I love this stuff.
and all that. But but stop motion is a trend, and it's big, and the younger people like it. Anime is definitely a trend. There's a trend now I'm noticing that I love. I love progression. I love new things. I love the old cartoons, and I'm a big fan of when they do retro style cartoons. I call them retro style. That game Cuphead is retro style.
Yes.
If you guys don't know that, it's all based on 30s style of animation. And also there's a brand new it hasn't debuted, but in the next 2 months you're gonna hear about the new Looney Tunes that they're making for this new HBO Max streaming service. And that's done in the classic style of the old cartoons. You'll see.
Are those? I'm sorry to interrupt. Are those some of the ones that they? I think they released like 2-minute clips a while back, like in France or something.
Yeah, they released a clip of Bugs and Elmer and Dynamite Dance. It was called being exploded. And then there's another one called that they released, at least out here in LA. They released it in a movie theater for Academy Award consideration. It didn't get nominated, but it's really, really classic. It's called Curse of the Monkey Bird. That was just one film. But you'll see these will be out very, very soon. I mean, I have images of it over to the side, but I'm not going to reach for this moment. But the other thing that's interesting to me is the other trend is, I'm not sure if there's a name for it, but I'm calling it personal or individualistic, which is really an old thing that's been going on in animation and independent films for decades. But it's manifesting now in series like Steven Universe, for one, Adventure Time, many others that have popped up on the internet or on Cartoon Network or whatever. But it's like kind of one person's point of view about it may be a fantasy, but it's really about life and about how to interact with other people. It's an interesting little trend that's out there that I like. I think it's cool. But then again, you don't want to see anything. I don't care what it is. You don't want to see anything dominate. You want. Here's my advice, by the way. If your question in any way is looking for advice, my advice is don't follow the trends unless you really, really love it. Unless you love doing classic style animation, which I love. I love when people do it. Don't do it unless you absolutely that's how you see animation to be. If you see animation to be however you see it to be, that's what you should do. And it's okay to copy things in the beginning, like you copied from you made frame grabs. I used to copy out of the comics in Marvel comics, or I would buy at the time Gold Keys comics, but had
love them.
And Mickey Mouse, and I would copy. That's the only way we could copy drawings of Bugs Bunny was to buy the comic books. I now know years later they were way off model from it should be, but it was the only way to learn. And but when you look at stuff that's on today, you could admire it, you can copy it if you want, you can learn from it, but take the lessons from the stuff you're watching today. Take the lessons of the classic cartoons of the old days. And then apply yourself to it, and then I know what does that mean. I'll give you a good example on that. I suddenly thought of an example I don't want to give, so I want to alter the example in my mind. But SpongeBob, that's a perfect example. SpongeBob, which is like 20 years old now, right? SpongeBob was really a takeoff of what the creator, Steve Hillenburg, he passed away recently, unfortunately, but he was a marine biologist by trade and a cartoonist on the side, but he ended up in cartooning, and he created this SpongeBob character based on what he knew about marine biology. But he also based the cartoons on classic cartoons from the past. It was his vision, his version of doing a modern day version of like an old Daffy Duck cartoon or something. That was his way. It's twisted. It doesn't look, you might not see the connection, but that's what it was. So take what you like about older things or even modern day things, and apply your own point of view to it, and that really will be then you'll have something people will want to see. Put yourself into it. There's one more piece of advice.
Okay.
I'm going. We've gone on to a whole other question that nobody
It's
asked.
okay. It's okay.
Because I used to be in development at different studios, which meant we were coming up with new ideas. We would talk to artists, and one of the things we said was that the best cartoons, the best. I don't care if it's the old days or the new days. I don't care when it is. Are the ones where, this is like what I just said a moment ago, where the creator is in it. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that you can identify with it. And I mean you. But if you can identify with it, other people can identify with it. The reason we love characters like Bugs Bunny, I use that one a lot because I love Bugs Bunny. Probably one of the greatest cartoon characters ever, if not the greatest.
I agree.
And the reason is that we all can identify with that character. We may want to be that character. We may already be him, not most likely not. But we can identify with him. He's downtrodden. He's usually being interrupted from his, hanging out, in his house, his hole in the ground by Elmer Fudd or some other character, and he's just basically got to retaliate. And of course, because he does, and he does it in a funny way and victoriously by the end, he's a hero. And we love that. We love him. Yeah. We love what he does. We wish we could be like him. And that's not true of every character that's created, but if you can put something in it that's you and or something that everyone can relate to, that's the key thing. I was involved with Nickelodeon back when they began. They started with Ren and Stimpy and Rugrats and Doug and all of those shows. The creators of those shows, they're in the show. I know it's Rugrats. Where's the creator there? But the creator's the parents, and it's his observation of the kids. And Doug was the Jim Jenkins who created that show. So that feeling has to be in there. You were talking to me before earlier off camera about Courage the Cowardly Dog. A friend of mine, John Dilworth, created that, and those are all of his insecurities. Those are all, he's a dog. He's a pink dog, and he's out in the prairie or something. But he lives in New York, and he's putting his own spin on it, and that's the key thing that you should do with your characters. It's easy, really, in some ways. Whenever we draw and doodle, we're drawing about something and doodling that we're thinking about or seeing. We're observing people on the street with masks on their face now, and then maybe there's something funny. Maybe it's too soon, but maybe there's something funny about that. And, that's going to be the fashion from this point on. I'm going to wear my Bugs Bunny, face mask as soon as they make one. They will.
I'm sure the mask is going to have to become fashionable now. So, I got a question here from Mike 25. You kind of answered a little bit of it, but it's how many years have you guys had animated, and what attracted you to it? So I know you said you weren't an animator. Just to give my answer, I started animating professionally around 18, 19 years old. I got a job at a educational video game company in Terrytown, New York. And they hired me on the spot in college, just within my first semester after seeing my portfolio. And I did character design for them for a few months, and then I moved up to animator, and then I worked on stuff. And I kind of had jobs on and off, but mostly I've worked in illustration and graphic design, the majority, as well as education. Now, what attracted you to animation? You already kind of answered that. You were interested in knowing. Quickly for me, I was just I just loved what I saw on the screen. My earliest memories of Magilla Gorilla cartoon, Ricochet Rabbit, things like that. I'm a big Hanna-Barbera fan. So, but that's it. I just kind of wanted to quickly not ignore his answer. But if you have anything to add.
I read comics. I wanted to be a comic book artist, and then I love movies too. I like regular movies, and TV and things. So when animation, I realized at one point, was a combination of the two.
Mm-hmm.
An X there. Combination animation, drawing, and live action movie storytelling, and then you can put it together. Animation had both things.
Yeah,
and you can do things now. Back in the old days, there were things you could only do in animation that you couldn't do in live action. Just visuals that you couldn't do. Now today it's different. CG really did change everything, and pretty much any outrage. But then again, CG is animation. And
Yes.
that's part of the world of animation. When I teach a lot of the students, that's where they're going to go. They're going to end up in special effects, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of see that. I studied a lot of that in college. Actually, the reason I got the first job back in the 90s, I don't know if you ever heard of it, there was a program called Director. They used to make, that's how I knew the program Director. That was what I took my first semester at college. And I took my love of animation and animated characters in there. And then from there, I learned effects programs and things. And I moved on to different jobs. But yeah, the animation is my passion. It's what I love. One of the reasons I wanted to also talk to you and share this with everybody. Now, we talked earlier a little bit about theatrical cartoons. We talked a little bit about television. You kind of said you watched them on TV, and you're a big Bugs Bunny fan, which is fantastic. I'm a huge Bugs Bunny fan. I was, and we talked a little bit about the modern trends, but when you look at theatrical animation and you look at television animation, there is a difference. Obviously, it couldn't spend the same money. We went to what they call limited animation for the most part. There was still some full motion involved, but it was mostly limited. How do you see, limited animation these days? I mean, it's a lot more what we call puppet animation. Back years ago, they were using programs like Flash. Now we use a program that's called Harmony.
Right.
But Harmony has that puppet animation feature and stuff. How do you feel about cartoons today? Because my personal feeling is they've changed because of the technology, and they're not as
Puppety.
Yeah, they're not as animated as they used to be. You're right, very puppety. They're a little more stiff. It's almost like listening to a radio show with a little movement.
Are you talking about movie cartoons or TV cartoons?
Let's look at TV cartoons right now, because movie cartoons might be a little different.
Well,
Are.
well, all I can do is explain why things are. I mean, I like, again, to hold off your question for a second. I love that theatrical animation is moving towards a more animation, or what's the right term, cartoony aesthetic, or a more like the classic cartoons, more like hand drawn.
Yes.
Looking at cartoons like animated features like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, or Inside Out, or almost anything that's come out in the last few years. That said, there's also been a few puppety films. I call them, I'll use your term, but puppety films, like, believe it or not, the Frozen franchise is kind of puppety if you think about it. There's some squash in there, but it's generally the old school, way that they've been doing it for a few years. I like this newer elastic look that is something that hasn't been done yet, that they're doing it now.
Yeah.
The Incredibles sort of do that in a way. I can go on and on about some of this stuff, but as far as your original question about talking, I mean, obviously that started originally. It's not connected really to what's going on today, but obviously when TV animation started, the budgets were ridiculously low because there was no money. Animation was just thought of as the cartoons people saw in movie theaters, or the Disney features. Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, these lavish, expensive, beautiful, theatrical, full-moving feature films. And the other flip side of that would have been the Tom and Jerry's, Bugs Bunnies, that were in movie theaters. There were certain budgets that were established to make those cartoons. There were certain processes in place to make those cartoons. Suddenly, this thing called TV comes along. And when they were suddenly making 6 or 8 Tom and Jerry cartoons every year, 6 or 8 7-minute cartoons done in that lavish, full style, no dialogue. They were doing that, and they immediately went to churning out a half hour of cartoons every week in the beginning. Later, it became dozens of half hours of cartoons every week. Sometimes daily cartoons and suddenly they had to cut the budgets down. The animation became more limited.
Yeah.
Less artwork was done. Movements were not smooth like they used to be. And dialogue was now pumped up. Let's get by having lots of dialogue to tell the story, So amazingly, that lasted for like 20 years at least, maybe more than that, maybe almost 30. And then somewhere around the time that Nickelodeon, not to give you the complete history of the universe of television here, but when Nickelodeon started around 1990, 91, that's talking about the Nicktoons, and those started the original animation for TV. That brought back an idea that actually was at the beginning of TV cartoons, but it disappeared completely in that 30 years, which was the creator-driven cartoon, meaning somebody, a person, comes up with a concept that's theirs, and it looks like theirs. It doesn't look like the cookie cutter Hanna-Barbera style, which I love. But Hanna-Barbera and DEEP and Filmation, all these factories that were producing TV animation, kind of settled on a certain style. Almost every adventure cartoon had that Space Ghost Johnny Quest look to it. And TV cartoons just had a certain look that was just, shortcut. People accepted that. Nickelodeon changed that. Things like Rugrats didn't look like cartoons on television that they were used to up to that point. And so, and The Simpsons came out around that time too. I think it was 89, right?
Yes, so, 89.
So around that time, things just began to change. This more Matt Groening's personal art style was the thing for that show. And similarly with Doug and Rugrats and Ren and Stimpy. So the thing is, and then later Rocco and all the other Nicktoons that they would start producing, that was the new thinking. That then suddenly Cartoon Network started it up, Disney Channel started it up. And we've had the last 20 years or so, maybe more now, 30. Yeah, I'm getting old. The last 30 years has been what we call the creator-driven cartoon for the most part on television. And then what happened is kind of an offshoot of this bifurcated. I love that term, bifurcated. The bifurcated thing of The Simpsons coming into it back in '89. Suddenly there was the beginning of the adult cartoon. The Beavis and Butthead, the South Park. The primetime series, the King of the Hill, and now we have Bob's Burgers, and of course Family Guy, and many, many others. So the thing is, and of course we have shows, the Rick and Morty's. We have the Adult Swim contingent of that sort of cartoon that's aimed at both grown-ups and kids, or just grown-ups in some cases. So I think in the case of the Rick and Morty / Family Guy cartoon, the emphasis on dialogue for a variety of different reasons depending on the show, but mainly it's verbal and more. It's just a verbal humor is more the front and center, and the artwork and movement takes his back seat. Nothing wrong with that. I'm all for anything, all for everything. That's generally the. I don't know if it's. I think there's some. I mean, you're going to see soon with the Looney Tunes that they're making. They're fully animated, and they're completely loony and crazy. So it's. I think we're going to have all these different styles, and I hope we do. It's a great thing.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree. I mean, I'm all for the creator driven, and I wasn't knocking. I just want to say I wasn't knocking the puppet animation. I think what I as long as the story's good, I've always said, as long as the story's good, I'm gonna watch. I'm gonna read the comic. It for me, it has to be a good story, good jokes, things like that, for me to want to come back.
Right.
What I was saying though is I feel, at least on television animation, especially this puppet animation is really limiting. It's very stiff. It doesn't have that fluidity that to me makes a lot of it entertaining. When I'm watching the cartoons, I mean, I love classic cartoons. Back in the 90s, I was a teenager in the 90s. To me, probably Animaniacs might be the best cartoon ever created for me. I've always said it was my version of Looney Tunes. They were parodying people I knew. It wasn't like going back and looking at old Looney Tunes and who's that actor that they're parodying Bogart? Right. Well, I didn't know who Bogart was really until I was in college and watching old movies. So that's how I felt. And they weren't really puppet animation. That, obviously it was limited animation, sometimes full. It was a combination of the two. But when you start seeing the computer software taking over, specifically in sometime probably the early to mid 2000s, and you're seeing, you're seeing these cartoons, and I just feel it's a lot more just standing around and watching people talk to each other,
right?
And it's not, and though the jokes could be good, I mean, like I said, it's almost like listening to a radio show. I felt that about Bullwinkle. The original Bullwinkle cartoons could have done that. The Fractured Fairy Tales, anything that came out of that era.
Sort of intentional. A lot of
Yeah.
those early ones are like that. You're right.
And I just feel nowadays, specifically, and it's technology driven. I think. I think that's the thing, and that's kind of what I was asking your opinion on. Do you kind of feel do you feel they're still entertaining if you're watching more puppet based animation?
Well, it depends. Oh, it depends on if it is entertaining. Some people are bad ones, but no, it's just a matter of the person who's making it, and what they're trying to do. And I think that the technology, the fact that we can make professional looking animation off of our computer screens in our home these days, that's something that wasn't done 20 years ago, and 30, 40, and 50. It was all you had to come to the studio. There would the equipment was expensive. Today we can do all kinds of things. We can record this conversation and then make an animation of it. And that to some people might be good enough. Animated enough. It's just up to the person. I mean, I've met many animators who are just diehard into the full animation of the old days, and everything is based around the animation, and dialogue is totally secondary. It just depends on what they're doing, what it's for, there's a lot of different trends and all.
Yeah.
And a lot of different outlets. We're in a boom right now. I mean, I've lived long enough to see feast and famine 2 times now. I mean, the last big boom was in the 90s when The Lion King came out. Suddenly everybody was doing animation, every studio. And CG was emerging, and Nightmare Before Christmas just opened. So there was suddenly a very strong, it was called a boom. Everybody in animation pretty much had a job. It's even bigger this time around with Netflix and Amazon and cable networks. And there's so many more outlets for animation that and of all sorts. So it's a great time to be a student of animation, because there may be a career here for you. And I think there will be. Animation will never die or never end. People it's a folk art in some ways. We're seeing, especially when it's hand drawn, but you can, there's a lot of your hand in it. Even CG, and to some extent, less or so, but certainly stop motion, and it's really people. I think that's one thing the students really dig is the fact that they can see the art, they can feel the art. It really is an art form. It isn't mechanical. It isn't robots. I think that's an impression people might get out of CG, but there is a real art form here, and it's a big blank piece of paper, and anything you can imagine can be on it. So that's what should keep everybody going and being involved in that.
And I think that's great, because I taught animation for maybe 16 years on the college level. And a lot of it dealt with the computer, but I also incorporated some traditional stuff, because I always feel having that traditional knowledge is important, even transferring onto the computer. I actually remember when I got into the industry in the mid to late 90s, some of my friends who were doing 3D back then, they were sculptors originally, and they were able to transfer the idea of traditional sculpting into 3D, so it was able to help them out. And I always say technology, because I'm not anti-technology. I want to make that clear to everybody. I have my Cintiq right next to me. I have a 27-inch Cintiq. I have Adobe Animate on my computer. I have a Toon Boom Harmony. I animate on my Cintiq. I may draw traditionally, and I do the puppet animation that I'm not against. So I'm just saying I'm all for technology. Use it to the best. Right. Behind me on this side here is my traditional side. I pull out a light box sometimes. You can't really see it. I'd have to kind of angle it, but that's my traditional side of my room. I just spin my chair around and I pull out my light box, and I can animate on that, or when I illustrate a comic or something, everything's back there. So I'm always spinning between the two. Technology it's just a tool to get the work done. I don't want people to be afraid of technology, afraid of a software, afraid of it. Use what you can to tell your story. I don't know if people are still using it, but there was that free one that was from Studio Ghibli, like the kind of open source I forget the name of that software right now. But that's, you can learn these things and do it all amazingly. And I like what you said about, when you're looking at work, take the things that you like and bring it into your work. I'm a huge Tex Avery fan. I love his humor. I love everything about him. I am such a fan. I'll even just, hopefully this doesn't unplug my Cintiq, turn this around, and I don't know if you can see, but I got a Preston Blair Red Hot poster above my Cintiq.
I got it.
And that's her dance cycle behind it, and oh, that's awesome. So,
this was on my bulletin board that was behind my screen here, so I pulled it.
That's great. I love those little pieces.
Here's a plug. You haven't seen the new Blu-ray that I helped work on this. This is one of the things I do. Is put these old cartoons out to the public. It's a beautiful Blu-ray. We're just putting out the Tex Avery's on Blu-ray for the first time. They look amazing.
That's great. I got to pick those up. I actually saw you post. Excuse me. I think it was a couple of weeks ago on one of the Facebook pages. Maybe it was a Cartoon Research Facebook page or something that you had. I saw those. You post about that. So
yeah, I
have to, right now, no one's delivering anything that's not a necessity. So I kind of gotta.
Well, I think this is a necessity.
I don't disagree. I think getting DVDs, comic books, anything at this time to keep your mind off what's going on, to give you an entertaining, escape. Yes, I think those are necessities.
Totally. I tell my students, at the very beginning of the class, when I first started to teach, I actually thought it was silly. Meaning, they asked me to come in and start talking about the history of animation. And I don't know why, but I thought everybody knew it. I just thought, don't they know all this stuff? And then I went in there, and then I realized they didn't. And then I realized, okay, I'll talk about it. But I also usually started off by talking about how, why is this important? Why are we sitting in a school university, and I'm going to show you cartoons, and we're going to talk about the history of these cartoons. And the thing is, so I've thought about it often. And the thing is, it's like any art and entertainment, and especially during our darkest times in history, even before there were film, but in our darkest times in this last century, entertainment, animation not only entertains, but it also can teach. There's a lot of roles for people who animate. So. And knowing the history of it makes your work better. You get to be inspired by it. And one thing I also tell my students is name any director of films you like. I could say just name any animation director. Maybe they'll mention Henry Selick or Brad Bird or somebody like that. And I've met those guys, and they know their animation history. They are the biggest fans. Anybody in animation who Tim Burton, or even live action, Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese. They not only know animation. Those guys in particular know, of course, film history. And the thing is, why do they care? Why are they? Of course, they know film history. They grew up. They were raised on it. They're inspired by it. They've learned from it, and they're putting themselves into new movies that they're making, but they take a lot from the old.
Yeah,
that's what gets that magical, moment. When you talk to Matt Groening or something, you find something that's like a big bang of completely different, like Adventure Time or Matt Groening with The Simpsons. I've met both creators. Penn Ward is the Adventure Time creator, and I've talked to them and they love to talk to me because I'm an animation historian guy, and it's like somebody I can talk about. And they'll start asking about obscure people from the past, but The Simpsons, Groening has said many, many times, it may not look like Rocky and his friends, but that's one of the biggest influences on that show. I don't even see it. But the thing is, that's the biggest influence on that show from his point of view. He's seeing something from the past. He's putting his own spin on it.
Yes.
And so that's the case with literally all of the cool stuff.
Yeah.
In live action, I'll say, live action and animation. Do you like Star Wars? Star Wars were the old Flash Gordon serials from the 1930s, which were rerun on TV when I was a little kid. And George Lucas saw them too. And he wanted to make a modern day version of those old movie serials, and
Mm.
if you're into those old movie serials, and I am,
Mm.
people like me think like, oh, I see what he did there. Oh, look what he did. He put a reference to this. You can get that a lot. A lot of people today are catching that in Marvel. And that's one of the reasons of Marvel's success is that they don't let go. They're making a film that you don't have to know anything about Marvel from the 60s or 70s or 80s, and you can watch those movies today. But if you do know something about the comics, they're throwing in stuff that you know. Oh yeah, look what he's got that character. You know, and throw in stuff in those. That's all true with animation. The best animation, the best TV shows. It's going to have a combination of the two. That's
I think that's fantastic. One thing I just want to add, and this is something I've always told my students, because you said filmmaking, you filmmakers know about this. Well, at the end of the day, animation is filmmaking. Whether you're making a 3-minute short or a 90-minute animated film,
right?
You are making a film. So, and all the same stuff goes into it, except your output is whether it's through the computer, hand drawn. So you're not actually using actors and saying pose here, but you still got to think about lighting. You still got to think about positioning, where the camera is going to be, all that stuff. That all goes into film. And that's just something that I share with my students when I talk about this stuff. And I think it's important to realize it doesn't matter if it's live action or animation. You are looking at a film. So, and what I want to say, and this is to the audience, not directly to you, don't be like anti something. Don't be ignorant against it. I know a lot of students I teach, well, I only watch this. Like Disney's the only thing, or, learn from everything. Be open-minded. I mean, I've watched, we can sit here, I'm sure, and talk about like Terry Toons and the cartoons from Harvey and all these great stuff that I love. I'm a big Mighty Mouse fan. And my very first character I created when I was 8 years old, I thought I was parodying Mighty Mouse and created a character called Mighty Monkey, so it was, it's these influences that that you take on and sit and watch everything, absorb everything, because you can make great cartoons. And I don't even, I don't know if I sometimes even like the term cartoon, because if you look up the traditional meaning of cartoon, it just means a funny picture on, like a funny illustration, more than the animated. So I like to use the word animated or say animated cartoon, so people get the difference. But most people think illustration on paper is a comic, Now, I'm sorry. Were you going to say something?
I was going to say that the one other thing I've observed throughout time is wisdom of an old timer is that it's all connected. One thing I say in my class is that Disney, the studio of Disney from the 1930s, 40s, and 50s and 60s maybe, is the trunk of the tree. And there's roots below the tree. There's the stuff that came before Disney, Birdie the Dinosaur and Felix the Cat and whatever. And then above the tree with branches is everything else. What does that mean? Everything else. It means everything. Anime. It means stop motion animation. It means this, because it all grew out of that. And that's one thing to study. If you tell me, well, I only like Disney, or I only like one thing, I'll tell you how it connects to all the other things. I'm not going to do it now because it's too much. So if that would be a quiz or a challenge. But if someone says, well, anime is nothing like Disney cartoons, well, here's the deal. The anime that we all think of as anime today, which means Japanese animation, was the anime that we think of as anime today started with a guy named Osamu Tezuka. A majorly great guy. You should definitely look for his comics. He was a comic manga artist in the 1950s, even the late 40s. Amazing. He created the character that he's most known for. You may have heard of his the American title is Astro Boy, right? Astro Boy and Kimba the White Lion and other stuff that I'm forgetting right now. But he started not only became so popular in his style, but he started the animation industry in Japan. And okay, Jerry, you lost track of your question. Your question was, how does that even connect to American animation? What are you talking about? Because he was a gigantic Disney freak. He was a Disney fanatic. And before World War II, which interrupted a lot of things, considering the Japanese were involved, in the early 30s, he would be the only way you can collect anything, again, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have videotapes, was film, little 8mm film you could buy in the store, hobby film. And he would buy Betty Boop, Mickey Mouse, and he would copy them, like you were talking about, he'd copy the artwork. And if you look at his work,
Yeah.
look at those early 30s cartoons, the Cuphead style, you'll see it in his work, and then you'll see how it evolved into anime. I'm just saying.
No, I
Look into that.
completely agree with you. I always forget his name, but I always tell people, check out Astro Boy, see how it was and how he was influenced by American cartoons.
Totally.
I'm not a huge anime fan, but I do like some of the stuff. I actually read more manga than I watch anime. I find
Right.
that stuff better in print for me.
Right.
But
Most of the great anime directors, I can't say all of them, I haven't even looked into it that far, but most of them started out by drawing comics, manga.
yeah.
You know, whether it's Otomo, Miyazaki, you know, all of the big names were comic artists first.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just want to throw that in there.
I just want to reach out to the audience again. If you have any questions, because we're going to be winding down, because honestly, I think I could sit and talk to you for hours about so many things. You know, you kind of lit up a little bit when I mentioned Terry Toons, and
I love that. I'm into all of that. I'm into the obscure nooks and crannies of it all.
Yeah. You know, and I'm, you know, I don't want to keep you because I know your time is very valuable, and you generously offered. You gave us a lot of great information. So I'm just going to give them another minute or so to see if there's any questions that pop up. If there's not, I'm going to let you go. Is there anything?
I just want to plug my cartoon research, cartoonresearch.com blog. Looking over here to see if there's anything else I can point out to tell you about. I just showed you that book. That's another one of my books.
I think I have that one.
Yeah. And I did a fantastic video compilation last year called Porky Pig. We actually call it Porky Pig 101 is the actual title. It's only
cool.
But it's every black and white Porky Pig cartoon from the 1930s. And if you watch them in order, you get to see slowly. And I don't advise anybody doing this over one weekend, but it's good for watching, you know, at least on a daily or weekly basis. But there's 101 of Porky Pigs, and they start from 1935 and they go to like 1942, and you can see the evolution of the Warner Brothers style come into being from the very clunky, and by the end it's classic Looney Tunes by the end. So
that's fantastic. I love stuff like that. I gotta buy more DVDs. I know,
have, people think DVDs are dead, but they're not. They're not.
I have a whole thing under my table here. If I showed you, I have something probably 300-400 DVDs and boxes right here. I go to and pull out, and I got everything: Woody Woodpecker, the entire Looney Tunes, Popeye, everything's down there. And I pull them out, and I have a portable DVD player I keep right next to me while I work. And I sit and watch that stuff. So doesn't look like we have any more questions. I want to thank you for taking your time out. It was great chatting with you. I hope I get to chat with you again at some point. You gave a lot of great info, and thanks a lot. And everyone check out cartoonresearch.com and look up his books. You can get them on Amazon, I assume.
Yep.
All right. Go look up Jerry Beck on Amazon and look up his books. The one that I read, it was called Of Mice and Magic, and it was fantastic. I'd love to pull it out and read it again, actually, after talking to you. And one other book that I have to show that he was part of here, because you co-wrote this, right?
I co-wrote that one. It has a cell, an actual animation cell in the cover, as you can see, which is pretty weird.
Yeah, hold on. Where is it? There it is. So it's fantastic. All right. Thanks again. I'm going to let you go.
Thank you.
And I guess have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Bye.
Stay tuned.